And our final video of this week is on Sherman Alexie's Crazy Horse Boulevard. It is categorized in Best American Non-Required Reading as the Best American Poem. Maybe you'll disagree with a few things there. Maybe you will disagree that it is very American. Maybe you will disagree that it is a poem at all because it's written in prose. And you'll find it in the fixed form section of our unit in week 4, and maybe you think that it has no form or that its form, if it has one, is not fixed at all. So these are all things we can talk about in the discussion. It is a prose poem. We'll talk about prose poems a little bit later in the semester, or later in the poetry unit. We'll have a little unit on that. And I gave you some definitions of poetry at the beginning of this unit, so maybe you can apply those and figure out, do you think this is a poem? Do you not? But let's talk about the form here. And as you're reading it, maybe you didn't pick up on there being any sort of form. I didn't notice the form until I was almost done with the first read of the poem the first time I saw it. But it's a poem in 6 sections, right? And each section has how many stanzas? 6. So in a way it's similar to a sestina, not really, but in a way. And in each of those stanzas there's the use of a word, right? Or use of a number, excuse me. So if we look at the first stanza, number 1, during his lifetime, my big brother has chosen and been chosen by 6 best friends. Next stanza, 5 of them have died in car wrecks. Next stanza, where is the use of number 4? In Indian theology, there are 4 directions, east, west, north, and south. Third stanza, or fourth stanza, really there are maybe 3 Indians in the whole country who can say the 4 directions without secretly giggling. Fifth stanza, that might be only the 2nd time that somebody has put Indians and giggling in the same sentence. And the 6th stanza, I've only been to 1 funeral for one of my brother's best friends. So what's happening in these stanzas is he's using this word or this number in some way in the stanza. That's not always the case. Sometimes he will just repeat a sentence that number of times. So if I can find that. So if we look in the 6th stanza, the 6th section, the 3rd stanza there, he says ineffable, 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 ineffable. So instead of using the word for in that stanza, he just repeats ineffable 4 times. But the form has to do with these numbers, and it's a playing on these numbers. So we count down from 6 to 1, and then sort of like the sestina, we start again with 1 and build back up to 6. Unlike the sestina, we're not rearranging the use of the numbers. We go from 6 to 1, back to 6, back to 1, and so on. So that's kind of how the form is working there. So in the discussion, maybe you can feel like, maybe you think that's a gimmick, and it's sort of it's not really a fixed form, it's not really a form at all. We could talk about whether or not you think this is a poem, because maybe some of you will disagree with that. But I also want to bring up some topics for discussion, because I find this to be a really interesting poem. If you look on the first page of it, it appeared in the Best American Non-Required Reading, which is sort of an anthology of a bunch of weird types of writing. And this is categorized as the Best American Poem. And I think that there are a few things sort of American about them. Sherman Alexie, it will help you to know, he's a Native American, so that might inform your reading of the poem a little bit. So we can think about in the discussion, or you guys can contribute, how you feel like Indian tradition comes out in this poem. And is Indian tradition, does he think highly of it in the poem? Does the speaker think highly of it? And how does the speaker think of tradition in general? Maybe not just Indian tradition or Native American tradition, but tradition in general. He's, and when you think about that, keep in mind that he's writing in a prose form, right? So when we think of poetry, we don't typically think of prose, so it is a non-traditional kind of poem. And the form here is also non-traditional. So we don't have stanzas with rhyme schemes or anything like that. Instead, he's playing on the use of these numbers in each form. So can we extrapolate any sort of feeling that he has about tradition in that way? I also think, he talks about love and life and death, a lot of different things about that. He talks about form, he talks about irony a little bit. So these are all things that you can contribute to in the discussion. So tell me whether or not you think this is a poem, what you think his ideas on tradition are, what his ideas of form are, what's ironic in the poem, and whether you like this or not, whether you would like to read more things like this. We are going to have a prose poetry unit. I can't remember if it's next week or the 3rd week. I tend to enjoy prose poetry because it's a little weird, right? Sometimes it's difficult, but it can be wacky, and sometimes that's enjoyable. So Think about this. Think about its form. Is it a form? Is it not? And feel free to weigh in the discussion.